Have you ever had the experience with a narcissistic person and they so believe they're misunderstood? Have you ever believed in a narcissistic relationship that if I could just read their mind, everything in this relationship would be fine? This belief is a signature element of the narcissistic relationship. I mean, listen, it's not only there. I mean, in any relationship, even with a kid, we may wonder this. Like, if I could read their mind, right? If I knew they were having a bad day, maybe I wouldn't have asked them something that was kind of small and irritating, right? We go through that. But this idea, I wish I could read their mind and everything would be fine, is a unique feature of the narcissistic relationship. And if you could read their mind, then I guess you could calibrate your expectations. And then maybe the times you need to walk on the eggshells might feel a little more predictable. And you might even be able to do the right thing every single time. So you didn't always feel like things were blowing up, right? Because you could read their mind. You'd know exactly what to do or say. But you can't read minds. None of us can read minds. Though I have to say, I've talked to many survivors where they got awfully close to being able to read the narcissistic person's mind. You actually do start to be able to pick up really subtle things like the frequency of the jingle of the keys in the door that will tell you their mood, or the pace of their walking, or the subtlest expression on their face. The hypervigilance that evolves in people in these relationships, and any of you in these relationships, can result in you actually really, to a scary degree, learning to anticipate what you can do to keep things more regulated in the relationship, because the narcissistic person can't regulate. But one thing that makes this very difficult is that narcissistic people almost always feel as though they, only them, that they are misunderstood. Now, this sense of narcissistic being misunderstoodness can show up in several ways. Number one, leave it to the media. Of course, it's always the media, right? And the narcissistic people themselves. They're better at social media than any of us, right? And they're better at getting the word out about how misunderstood they are, how much they suffer more than anyone else, and how people are being so mean to them by calling out their behavior as a problem, and that we need to do more to understand their experience, with no reflection on the harm that they're doing to other people because of their behavior. No, it's only that everyone misunderstands them. But I have to say, in the past year or so, all of these narcissistic influencers are getting a much bigger platform. A lot of it is focused on how misunderstood they are. And we get to hear them talking quite openly about their shame and insecurity and what they need and what they want. So basically, many narcissistic people feel that even if they are aware that they are narcissistic, that their narcissism itself is still misunderstood. Number two, this whole misunderstood angle is very much, I gotta tell you, the vulnerable narcissistic person's ground game. Because the vulnerable narcissistic person, there's so much victimhood, disenfranchisement, entitlement, and shame and insecurity. The vulnerable narcissistic people basically want to say grumpy, hurtful things and get away with it because life, of course, is not fair for them. It's for this reason that relationships with vulnerable narcissistic folks may sometimes be the most difficult to leave, not only physically, but also psychologically. You feel this really icky mix of pity, guilt, shame, even compassion, because sometimes you see their genuine vulnerability seem to shine through, and at those times they kind of seem like a sad little kid. And then at other times they will deliver a hurtful zinger or complain at being asked to do the smallest thing because they're just too special to take the trash out. And when you attempt to communicate with them, a lot of their stance is that they're just so misunderstood. Number three, and here's where we talk about the hypocrisy, which is such a signature of narcissistic relationships. The double standard of the narcissistic relationship is where a lot of the frustration comes from for people in these relationships. One set of rules for you, one set of rules for them. They expect you to have empathy for them. There is no expectation that they have to have empathy for you. It's here that most people waste their breath and keep engaging with the narcissistic person. You're explaining, you're trying to convince them, you're trying to prove your case. And ultimately, though, they're not listening, first of all. Or the narcissistic person will say, oh, you don't get it. You don't get me. I'm just sharing an opinion and have a healthy debate with you. But you're so dramatic and blah, 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 right? There is this aggrieved sense in all narcissistic people, especially because remember, narcissistic people aren't delusional. They know when they're doing something bad. The thing is when they know they're doing something bad and they get caught. It's the getting caught where the narcissistic people are more likely to do the whole nobody understands me thing. They will happily go about their merry way doing hurtful, betraying things and not stop doing those things until they're caught. And then they're quite good at doing the impression management and optics work to make themselves look good again, as well as the victim stuff. But when they are caught, a lot of it is going to be, you don't get it. You don't get me. You don't know how I am or who I am. You view me as a monster. You don't get what just happened because you don't understand them. Number 4, and the real mind F, is that sometimes the narcissistic twist is that in the midst of them doing an entitled, self-serving thing, they will actually claim that this really messed up thing that they're doing is for your own good or for other people's own good. And that people are misunderstanding them and thinking that they're doing something bad when in fact they're doing something good. So a challenge in narcissism is something that we call poor self-reflective capacity. A fancy way of saying that the narcissistic person doesn't really understand their why, or they don't have good, quick access to their why they would behave the way they do. Because to do it, it gets at shame, right? And that gets complicated. It gets at the deep-seated stuff in them, the sense of inadequacy, their need to show up as perfect and special, because that pushes away that sense of insecurity. They tend to overcompensate through grandiosity. And all of this is pretty exhausting for everyone around it and for the narcissistic people themselves. So other people and other people's needs evoke shame and more inadequacy in the narcissistic person. So mix all this together and a narcissistic person cannot provide a thoughtful why. And instead what we get is blame shifting. They didn't do something bad. It's your fault. Or narcissistic people will pivot to either believing their behavior was misunderstood, or their intention was misunderstood, or their character is misunderstood, or that they are misunderstood, and then quickly spin into being a victim. The grand irony is that the narcissistic person has very little interest in understanding you, unless they really, really are trying to shake you down. But they may ask you why you do something. However, if you were to honestly answer why you did something, their pushback would either be contemptuous or gaslighting. They might even say things like, "Ugh, I knew there was something wrong with you." So that really leaves us with a question. What do you do? If you understand narcissism, you understand why the narcissistic person does what they do. But you can't share that understanding with them, because if you really shared what is why they do what they do, they would become enraged because it would paint them as vulnerable or insecure. So understanding isn't enough for you and for them. When they say that they feel misunderstood, if you put on your narcissism translation goggles, what they are saying is they feel they're being unfairly treated. It's all that victim stuff again. And of course, that takes us back to things like don't go deep, right? Don't defend, don't engage, don't explain. Don't explain is a big one here. Because if you try to explain their behavior to them, the narcissistic person's behavior to them, they are merely going to pivot right back to saying that they're misunderstood. The hardest part of being in a narcissistic relationship is to not feel like we are losing our empathy just by being in it. But keep in mind, being empathic doesn't mean that you have to buy someone else's BS. Because the narcissistic person is in fact struggling and does feel insecure and is overcompensating. And at the same time, their behavior is unacceptable. All of these things can be true at the same time. Listen, having empathy for them having to live in this constant state of internal shame and vulnerability doesn't mean that you keep making excuses, nor does it mean that you keep trying harder and harder to understand them more. You already get it. There's nothing to be done. Empathizing and enabling are not the same thing. You can empathize and also disengage. You can look at a person, most people who behave narcissistically, they have an internal hollowness to them. Now, listen, it's on them. They can do the work. You're doing the work. And it's not on you to do the work for both of you. These narcissistic antagonistic dynamics can also leave you feeling, this idea that they're misunderstood can leave you feeling like you're a bad person because they keep telling you that you misunderstand them and you're not doing enough to understand them. The whiny cry of the narcissist, believing that they are always misunderstood, is one of their most common victimized battle cries. Trust me, you do understand it. But there's not much you can do with that understanding than to realize it sucks to be them. Kind of sucks to be you because you're in this relationship. You can't fix it. Their behavior is not okay. And it is okay to focus on healing and taking care of yourself instead of trying to make a career out of trying to show them that you do understand them. You do. You ain't gonna ever prove it to them. There is no way to do that except to just let them keep engaging in their spoiled child antics for perpetuity. Because they truly, genuinely, almost delusionally believe that they are misunderstood. And no amount of you trying to understand the narcissistic person or people in your life will work. Because ultimately, for them to be understood, well, what that really would look like to them would mean that they always have to win, they always get their way, everyone always takes their side, they're never questioned or called out, they get something for nothing, and they have the world treat them as though they're exceptional, even if they do nothing to deserve that. And then, and only then, might they actually believe that they are understood. So I ask you, are you really up for that? Think about it. Thanks again.